We're going to get going for sake of time because it's 11 o'clock. All right, so welcome everyone to Diversity and Development, the chat series. And today specifically, we're talking about real estate and intentional racism. Not the most fun topic, but it's real and it's real to talk about. So I am Dominique Anderson. I am a social impact strategy consultant, and I am the founder of Dominique Anderson Consulting. And I'm excited to be here with everyone today. Lots of people I know, some new people that I'll meet, and I'm very excited. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things. If you have questions, by all means, or thoughts, anything, just put them in the chat box, and then we'll go through, and then I think around 11:45 or so, or towards the end of this, we'll just come together and we'll chat. We'll have questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, and by all means, make sure to visit us the rest of September. So every Thursday, same bat time, same bat channel, we have other conversations that we're having. So we're going to cover a little bit of the gambit inside of this real estate industry, from community to finance, right? And then the space and case for diversity and development. All right, and with that, I think we've let a lot of people in, and make sure I'm not leaving anybody out. This isn't just the cool kids club, because we're all the cool kids. Let's go. All right, we're excited? Y'all happy to be here? I'm happy you're here. Yay. All right, let's go. So we're gonna go from, in our chat today, we'll go from the Great Depression to the New Deal. We'll talk a bit about FHA and redlining, suburbanization, and then the impacts of all of these policies, and then where we are today. And of course, our today can mean different things depending on where you are. I'll put a little bit of the Nashville perspective and maybe even a little bit of the Memphis, and then you guys think through where you are in your cities. And my slides want to take time. Maybe, maybe not. Yes, there we are. All right, so we're going to start. We're going to talk about the Great Depression, or maybe last hired, first fired. So first, I want you all to look at these images. One, we have a Black family that's packing up and they're moving, because we know the Great Depression was really the big stock market crash, October 1929, and the Great Depression really lasted from 1929 to 1939. Also down here is something that's pretty poignant. Sign that says, right, can everyone see that? It says, Mexicans keep going, we can't take care of our own. Oddly enough, that's from the Chamber of Commerce. So, I mean, talk about intentional blatant racism. So we have, when Wall Street, we have the Great Depression, Wall Street crashes, there's a huge panic across the country, it wipes out millions, investors are wiped out, consumer spending stops, employment falls and it fails, workers are laid off. So who do we think that impacts first? Clearly that's going to impact first our Black and immigrant communities, right? So by 1933, we're really in the depths of this, right? 15 million Americans were unemployed, and nearly half of the country's banks had failed by 1933. So clearly that's going to impact housing greatly, right? Right. So who is that going to impact? Black and immigrant communities, last hired, first fired. Blacks and immigrant populations suffered severely during the Great Depression, right? They already made less than their non-Black counterparts. They were, of course, of least concern as layoffs happened, and the whole population just suffered, right? And so the jobs dried up. Slow motion, slow motion. All right, here we go. So we're talking about the New Deal, or maybe it's the Raw Deal. So look at this image that we have here, right? The world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. So look at the imagery. I was in PR for a long time and do a lot with marketing and branding, and that's very poignant, right? Because we're talking about what's the ideal situation, what are we putting in front? And we're putting this family with their 2 kids and their dogs hanging out in their car. Meanwhile, in front of this image, is a line of Black people who may be waiting for something, maybe waiting on a bus. It just breeds and breeds the inequality that was happening at that point, right? And so in this 1933 space, this is when FDR, president, says, okay, not only do I need to figure out my election and keep myself safe, but I also need to figure out how to put some things in place that are going to pick our economy back up and our country back up. And by all means, if you hear a lot of common words and phrases and actions happening between then and now, keep that in your mental Rolodex and let's talk about it a little later. So the National Industrial Recovery Act comes in 1933. A lot of things happened during this New Deal time and with all these things and these policies and procedures that FDR was rolling out. But the National Industrial Recovery Act was on surface, on paper, great for minimum wage regulations, and it made it legal to hire people who weren't worth the minimum wage because they lacked skills. Well, who do we think is that's really going to affect? Clearly, it's going to affect the Black and immigrant population most heavily, right? So no matter where they lived, Black workers were especially hard hit by the Depression, right? But in the rural South, side note, where I live, 500,000 Blacks lost their jobs. And you can only imagine what that meant for the immigrant population, because remember, as every new group comes into our country, they're usually kind of the low man on the totem pole. So it just gets worse and worse. And so even before the Great Depression, the Mexican population, specifically Mexican, I don't mean Latino, I don't mean Latinx, I mean specifically Mexican population from Mexico, grew from a few 100,000, from 300 some thousand to about 1 million, right, in that time. So there was a swell and a growth, and it was for things like farming and all these different opportunities that people immigrated to this country. In northern and southern cities, Blacks saw their jobs, which were usually already entry level, low paying, unskilled or semi-skilled. They saw those jobs disappear or consumed by the economy, or they would go to really desperate, unemployed whites. This is where we were, right? And so another one of the programs that came in was, or another organization that got started, was the Tennessee Valley Authority. So again, on paper, we know that the TVA started, they built the dams, they harnessed the water, that helped different things, the flooding, the electric, all these things that the TVA on paper did. Here's the caveat. Here's the intentional racism and the effect. When those dams were built, behind those dams, about 730,000 acres of land were flooded. That displaced about roughly 16,000 people, right? They were forced out of their homes. So how does the government rectify this? They give this cash, they give this money and this benefit to farmers. White farmers, predominantly, were given settlements for their condemned property because they had to condemn the property. We might call that a land grab now, whole other conversation. But who else was a part of that farm system? Who else was a part of that land? Sharecroppers. Predominantly what? Ding, 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 you guessed it, Black and immigrant. How much do you think they got? Put in the chat. How much do you think that Black sharecroppers got, or any other sharecroppers for that matter? How much do you think? A lot? A million? 1,000? 100,000? Nope, zero. Bumpkus, zero, right? So again, intentional racism, we're setting the scene for something here. So it's not about, I had someone ask me, so is this all going to be about doom and gloom? No, it's about truth, because we can't move forward if we don't know what happened behind us, right? So we're doomed to repeat history if you don't improve it, right? If you don't learn from it. So that's 1933. We have farmers and sharecroppers. Everybody's doing their own funky thing. 1934, the National Housing Act comes about. So that's what created the Federal Housing Administration. And good in theory, good for some, absolutely. What really happened? So the FHA was developed, and there also was the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was developed. And why do we love this HOLC so much in this story? We love them so much, and I do mean this all, relatively tongue in cheek. They're really great because at this point, the FHA was built, it was designed really to build housing for, white, middle income, lower to middle income families, individuals and families, right? Blacks and other people were just left out of these suburban ideals, and they were pushed into urban housing projects. Put a mental note there, housing projects. So this just furthered the segregation efforts, right? And so to make it even more, not only are we incentivizing and subsidizing builders who were mass producing these suburbs out of the urban areas, but we're giving them money to make sure that they build housing that is purely for whites, these subdivisions that are all white, and with the requirement that none of the homes be sold to African Americans, right? So we want to make sure in every direction we can that this is what's happening. So look at this picture that's on the screen. When I first saw this picture, I thought those were flags, and then I read it, and it says, look at these homes now. Just terrible. An entire block run by Negro invasion. Every house marked X, now occupied by Negroes. Actual photograph of 4300 West Bell Place. Save your home, vote for segregation. This literally was like an ad or flyer that would go out to the community to say, we have a Negro invasion. I literally think that that's going to be my new phrase for the rest of the year. Like, Negro invasion is so egregious and it's so very real, right? So let's go back to our good HOLC friends, Homeowners Loan Corporation. Late 1930s, they create these maps where they're grading areas of communities, areas of cities, right? So there's 4 different grades that you can get, and they go from, hey, great, perfect, to really terrible. What do you guess the really terrible areas had in them? Let's think. Take a moment, put it in the chat. What do you think? Ding, ding, ding. If you said Black people, you're right. So those were in red, hence the name redlining. So everywhere they had a lot of Negro invasion, there was a red line. And that was considered high risk for mortgage lenders. So clearly we're saying wherever the Black people are, you don't really want to lend over there. We really want them to build their own community. We really want to make it difficult. We definitely don't want them coming over here. So realtors knew we can't bring any Black people over here. We really can't do anything with them. So on one of the maps from Camden, New Jersey, there was a really funny thing. And again, remember that I say funny with tongue in cheek. There was a note on one of the maps from Camden, New Jersey that said, it is 100% poor class Negroes, practically all on relief. A high wall, however, prevents their spread, like the cooties. We don't want the Negroes to invade everywhere, so let's build these walls. So just when you drive around your city or your town or your state, your community, if it's an older community, if the homes are old, turn of the century homes, or they were built in the 30s and 40s, look around. Are there walls? Do you see, look at the real architecture around there, and then start reframing what you think may have happened. And then fast forward that to today, to what we're doing and what we're building and what that message is. Are we moving forward, or are we doing something similar? So that's something to think through. So I said put a pin in the welfare or in the public assistance. In addition to all of these other wonderful things FDR rolled out, he also created the Public Works Administration, created in theory for affordable housing. So again, on paper, they were responsible for projects like highways and buildings, natural resource conservation, energy, flood control, housing. But in real life, they created housing projects, right? Not just them alone, but that was part of the work. And the highways, I want you all to think about, put in the chat, if you will, put where you're from or where you grew up. Put that in the chat. And if you grew up in an area that was predominantly Black, put that in there, make a little note for me, because it's important to think about, is there a highway, a major highway that runs right through the community? And can you talk to somebody and ask them, how was it before the highway and how was it after? I can talk to my mother, I can talk to other people in Nashville about North Nashville, and we can all tell you stories about how before the highway went through, it was one community, and after the highway went through, it was a different community altogether. And you'll almost notice, you should notice, and if you haven't ever thought about it, then think about it today. Start looking at these different communities where the highways run through. Maybe you do a little research, unearth what was it like before and what was it like after? Is it predominantly Black? How did it break apart the community? How did it disenfranchise the community, right? And so these are all things that we think about. The PWA also administered loans and grants to state and local governments, which hired private contractors. Now, a lot of those contractors were Black. So when you get the argument that this was all good, you can hear that, yeah, they definitely did bring in Blacks, people of color, immigrants to do the work, but they were always, almost always the subs. They almost always made less. They almost always had the worse and poorer working conditions. So let's be very honest about what it was and what it wasn't. So if you're with me, we now have housing projects in the urban area. We have white flight to the suburbs, and it's very segregated. So you think, okay, everybody Black, everybody poor lives in these housing projects. Kind of, sort of, but not quite how it was originally intended. When they started building these housing projects, they were for lower middle class families, but they were still segregated. So there were white housing projects and there were Black and other housing projects, right? And so there was even segregation in that space, which is pretty egregious. It just doesn't seem to stop, right? So they definitely didn't want Blacks in the white housing projects. When we get into the segregation, we think about what was it like before everything happened, before these housing projects, before a lot of this change. There were absolutely communities and homes where people lived, and they weren't segregated, right? People were segregated purely by socioeconomic status, right? So everybody that was poor lived pretty much in the same place. They all lived together, right? And that's how you had a commonality. People got to fight together, they worked together, they lived together. And so there are people that had these ideas and ideals that we shouldn't all be together, and they made sure to break us apart because God forbid we actually talk to each other and come together and work together, right? And it becomes a bigger thing, and now people believe things they didn't actually know they believe. They didn't actually have a problem with people previously, but now they're told they should and that we're not equal and we shouldn't be together. So it really is a fester that happens, and everything starts from the head and works its way down. So as we think about this kind of segregation and this separation and this suburbanization, we have to put housing covenants in there, right? Housing covenants and restrictions in there, because it's definitely not enough that we've already built different communities, but we also want to make sure that there are rules and laws on top of that to keep Blacks and immigrant populations and others in their place. So look at this image, and it really says a lot, right? And I would wonder how many people have actually, when they grew up, right? If you grew up in the 40s, 50s, 60s, you may have seen things like this and it didn't even register. But I wonder now, like, how does it register differently for you? So if you look at this sign, again, I want you to keep Negro infestation in the front of your mind. So this sign says, Negroes, the community could become another ghetto. You owe it to your family to buy in another community. So we want to make sure that they understand this isn't where you should be, because we don't want it to turn into a ghetto, because clearly we did that. But we all know now, we're all super up to date and know that it was done upon us and not something that we did to ourselves. So when we talk about housing covenants and restrictions on people, remember a few minutes ago, I said that there's always somebody on the bottom. There's always the target, not cool group, right? The odd man out. So at one point, a gentleman by the name of Richard Ornstein went to Sandpoint County Club area of Seattle, late 1952. He decides he wants to buy a house. Just so happens he's a Jewish refugee from Austria. There's all this hesitancy, there's this pushback. Turns out our good friend Daniel Boone Allison, who was the head of the Sandpoint Country Club Commission, tells this gentleman and his realtor, yeah, the community will not have Jews as residents. So understand that it's not just relegated to one group, but there's always somebody who's on the low end of the totem pole and gets grouped in. So it never makes sense to me that we're against each other. We all really could come together, because it's, at one point we were all the odd man out. It just so happens we still wake up Black every day, and it's rough. So, and let me also take a quick pin and say that there's not that there weren't groups of people and there weren't individuals who made a way out of life and they had a great life and they owned things and they were successful and moved forward. Let's not make this that everyone who had Black or brown skin was downtrodden all the time. The intent of this conversation is to say the intentional racism. And when you do find people who made it, you have more respect for them, or you should, because you realize how much they had to fight against, right? So that's the whole point of today. 1968, we motor forward, right? We have 1968. What happens in 68? Well, in April, Dr. King was killed. What also happened related to housing, 1968 expanded on previous acts and it prohibited discrimination. So we're at this point where we have this act. It's Title VIII. It becomes the Fair Housing Act of 1968. It says you can't discriminate based on anything: color, religion, orientation, family status, ability, all of these things, right? So that really started in 68. Unfortunately, by 1968, the segregation and the racism was so high, right? There were a lot of whites that were deeply committed to it. So they use legal and illegal ways to keep different people out, whether you're Black or Jewish or Irish or whatever that determiner was for you at that time, but predominantly Black and immigrant, Mexican Americans at that point. There were a lot of, and by that point there was Puerto Ricans and all groups that were being, discriminated against. So they were burning crosses and burning houses. So let me tell you a little quick story. When I was, I don't know, it was in the 80s, however old I was young. We were going to buy this house in Donaldson, Tennessee, in Nashville. Very, very white. As is most of Nashville, but this community was nice. And I can't tell you what I ate for lunch yesterday, but I remember this house. It was a great ranch. It had a big tree in the back. There was a tire swing. There was a little creek that ran in the back. Beautiful home, right? We were closing on it. My parents were going to close on it. It was going to be great. They burned it down. And there was whatever was left, it was a little message, right, for us. So that was in the 80s. While it was not legal to discriminate on paper, it was still real, right? And it's still happening today, depending on where you go. One thing that we have to keep in mind are the federally subsidized programs that were added in during all of this New Deal. This is where we saw welfare programs come along with public housing, right? And so the welfare system was originally meant to help predominantly white, middle-class women and families. But because there were systems that were put into place for those same individuals to progress quickly and to keep Blacks and immigrant families from progressing quickly, they became the predominant users of the welfare system. And, it's funny, I have a colleague who's going to be on a call, and I think I have some people in here from New York. You all are probably pretty well aware that New York had the man in the house rule, and it's still pretty similar, right? It required welfare workers to make surprise, unannounced visits to homes. If there were fathers living in the home or any evidence of a male presence found, cases were closed and welfare checks were discontinued. Why is that a big thing? Well, that's a big thing because now what we're creating is a system. We're breaking apart families because we're saying we can't make enough on our own, but we can't be together as we make more in welfare. It's a system, it's a systematic mindset that happens. And so we have men out of the home more and more and that's not by any means the only reason, but that is a way of disassembling the Black family, disassemble the Black power structure, the Black wealth structure. So there's that. And that is, you know, welfare, public housing, all of these. So where are we today? Really the impacts that all of this had, if you think about it, and many of us, most of us even, are in the real estate industry in some aspect. So we understand the built environment, right? Where people live affects their life, from transportation to education, employment, opportunities, healthcare, all of it leads back to real estate and the built environment. So now when we talk about creating better built environments and we talk about revitalizing communities, we're off. We're off a step, and we're fighting against things that have been in place for so long. So the wealth system inside of Black families, we know that homeownership is a primary driver of wealth, right? So whether it's owning a home or owning multiple pieces of real estate, it's a driver of wealth. Homes in Black communities are valued 25% less than in white communities. So we're already fighting a system. When it comes to mortgages and home ownership, Blacks and Latinos are going to get 40% less opportunity to get mortgages than their non-Black and Latino counterparts. Even in refinance, there's a difference, right? And there's a hesitancy and a segregation in that space. It's very difficult. When I think about where we are today, I can think about Nashville, gentrification, displacement, traffic. I live in China, also known as Mount Juliet. So, you know, traffic is a real thing. And because of the suburban sprawl, right, the white flight, we now have people that still live so far. If they live there, they grew up there, that's what they know. They've built homes, they have homes, they live there, right? Or they came from another place and that's where they go. We still have a very similar mentality. Many people still have that same mentality, whether it's on paper or not. And so traffic is horrific. We have to think through that. I think that's what we're, in theory, doing right now in Nashville. And displacement, people are pushed out of communities that they grew up in and they lived in all their life, right? And so it's very difficult. And then gentrification, again, like we talked about, if land is cheaper in these Black communities, by all means, we're going to go and snatch up all this land. But instead of taking the time to talk to communities and understand, this is where you are, you actually love your community. On the external view, it looks like you should care about what we care about, but people have different things that are important to them. So maybe we talk to communities and build what they want and what they need, right? But we still figure out how to make a profit. So that's a whole nother conversation, because that really is my full jam. Woo, we covered a lot. Are y'all still with me? Are you feeling good? Yes. So now I want to look in this chat. Yes. Okay. Yes. Frightening and sad. Thank you, Manuel. Frightening and sad. This wasn't taught in architectural school. Absolutely true. And then there aren't any other courses. Yes, Vanessa, there aren't a lot of these courses. A lot of people want to tell you the good side, but not the real side. And how do we fix this? Because if we keep doing it, it won't get better. And absolutely in Whitehaven and Memphis, go Memphis, rural Ohio. Yeah, that's where you're from. And do you see these same things? Nashville, Belmead, beyond your control. Absolutely, it's beyond your control, but it's happening. Yep, Patrick, you grew up on Dickerson Pike, and you can see the shift. And Nashville's a funny place because we were a very classist city in addition to a racist city for a very long time. Yep, Chicago's very segregated. Yep, your dead end street was the Jewish street in Belle Meade. And also when it comes to the Jewish streets, because the proximity to houses of worship, to synagogues, right? Some people might want to walk or whatever, but yeah, that's a whole thing. So yes, 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 feeling aware, good. What about questions? I'm gonna open up, I think I'm gonna figure out right now, because God knows I don't know how to do all of this. Let's see. I'm gonna allow you to unmute yourself, and I think I want to unmute yourself. What about video? What about questions? What do we have? Black family bond, your neighborhood 1973. There was pushback, but ultimately no big issues. Absolutely. What about it? What about questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Anybody have a thought they want to share? Hey, Vanessa.
Hey, Dominique, I just want to say thank you. We
Yes.
always talk a lot about in this work, in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility work. We talk about the courageous conversations, but I don't think we ever lean in far enough
Mm-hmm.
with the history and with really understanding how we got here, to your
Yes.
point earlier, so that we don't go back to where we were before.
Right.
So I just wanted to say thank you to your entire team and to all of you, and a huge shout out to Daryl Cobb, who actually is how I found out about this information. Daryl Cobbins.
Awesome. Awesome. Excited. Thank you, Daryl Cobbins. And make sure, Vanessa, make sure you come back in a couple of weeks and see Daryl when he's here talking about the space and case for Blacks in development. I did want to say really quick before anybody else jumps in, next Thursday, we're going to have a really great chat, Good in the Hood, reframing the urban narrative. And this is important because this is how gentrification happens. If we don't tell the real history, and if we don't let people say how they really feel, then even when we do things like mixed income, mixed use, we're still talking about how downtrodden and sad a group is, and we're not listening to what they really want and how do we build the best for everyone. So next week we'll have Leslie Smith, who's the executive director of Memphis's Blight Authority, which, side note, Nashville, might want to talk to her. She's really great, and the Blight is really great. The Blight Authority is really great for moving things along. And then we'll also talk to John Corns, who's a realtor and a real estate investor, all around smart guy, and really supportive. What else? What else do we have? Chat, thoughts. Yes, so many people don't know how we got here. They don't want to know or want to recognize. And the more we talk about where we came from, there's absolutely no opportunity to go back where we were. Even from a legal standpoint, we have to be very clear of what happened so that we don't get back there.
Dominique, is there going to be a point when we talk more about the infrastructure of the family? You went a little bit into that, and you talked about the separation part in terms of the removal of the Black man in the home and how that was systemically created. Is there going to be a conversation about that and how we ended up in that, went into the mass incarceration piece and all of those different parts and how all of that is interconnected?
Boy. You are speaking all of my favorite love languages. So I'm what I like to call a money-making hippie, and my husband, who's on here, hates when I say that, but I really do think that I didn't go too deep into that conversation to answer your question today because I wanted to stay kind of focused in the housing space, but literally all the public works, all of that period of time when housing projects were introduced, when public works was introduced, when welfare was introduced, and when it shifted, I would be interested. The one question that I have is the shift from when there was a man in the house. When did that really, really shift? But it disproportionately affected Black and Latino households and immigrant households because they were absolutely already struggling the worst. And so to say, if you have a man in the house, you can't get these funds that you need, right? But you're never going to make the funds that you need by working, because we're going to make sure that you can't come in to this job based on all of the rules of you being qualified, highly qualified, right? And so if that doesn't send a buzz in your head from everywhere. Education, right? Highly qualified. It's all a part, and it's important, but there's so many places where this affects us. And so, yeah, Vanessa, I think absolutely, you've now made me want to do a whole nother segment. You let me know if that's of interest. I'll definitely do it. I'll do 40 of these if I had to, just to get the to get the information out and get the thought leadership going. What else? What else? What else? What else?
Dominique, how you doing?
Yeah, Jones.
I really enjoyed this. Real quick question,
Yes.
because you touched on redlining, and
Yes.
that's a really, I mean, we can go on and on for months talking about that topic.
Yes.
How do you think there's anything in place, or if not, what do you think needs to be in place to start reverse redlining?
So in theory, right, in 68, when they put together that Housing Act and all these things came in place that said you can't discriminate based on race and color and creed, in theory, that was supposed to stop it. But what you can't stop are people's intentions, right? So we have localized, internalized racism that's going to happen. So even if you go to a place, I mean, honestly, I think even condo boards, right? Like New York has those condo boards, and they verify whether you're good enough. And we know who that's going to disproportionately affect, right? I think that it's calling people out, it's calling out systems. And when we see these groups, we have to call that out and we have to speak up about it. Because otherwise, people are going to say, no, 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 we're not doing that, because look, by law, we can't do that. No, 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 definitely not. By law, we can't do that. It absolutely becomes, every single time, we have to speak up and say, this is happening. I mean, I think that's going to be anywhere we are in any point of this, in every direction we look at, we have to speak up and take full ownership and say, this is what's happening every time. Does that make sense? Is that helpful for you?
Yeah, I believe so. But let's talk about the loss of wealth part of that redlining, because redlining, there's so many layers to that, right? As
Yep.
far as how it's even today affecting those that it affected years ago, right?
That's right.
On the black
Right.
and white side, right? Like some
That's right.
people, you have black families that didn't benefit from this, and you have white families that probably have benefited from it, and some that probably don't even know that they benefited from it.
That's right.
So,
right.
What about that? What's a good conversation piece about the equity and the wealth side that's been lost for generations?
So when we have organizations like, Wells Fargo and Bank of America, who honestly, in recent times are some of the biggest, most egregious people in this process, and they were a big part of the wealth gap, right? And not giving loans, and still latently redlining. It still happens. People are calling it to the carpet. I mean, I think it always leads back to calling it to the carpet. But now with Bank of America and Wells Fargo putting in their money and saying, you know what, we were wrong, we did this, we foreclosed, we did all these egregious things, and now we want to make them right. Okay, great. One thing that's going to help us as Black people and as brown people, as Latinos, immigrants, every group that's going to help us is education. We have to know that we can buy homes. We have to know the real story, not somebody had said, we heard, and this thing, and they're not going to give us this, and I have bad credit. If I had $1 for every time someone told me, oh, I can't get a house, I have bad credit. And you ask them, when's the last time you pulled your credit? When did you check it? Oh, I don't know, it's been a while. And then you pull it, and they have like a 700 credit score. You're like, look, this is why we're not buying homes. This is why we don't understand. Right now is the best time, I believe, for us to go and really get what we need, because there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of curtains getting pulled back, there's a lot of organizations that are saying, you know what, we were wrong, we did this. They're putting it out, they're laying on the on the sword, saying this is what I did. So we now have to move from implication to education. and say, hey, communities, bubbles, pockets everywhere. Did you know that this is the credit score you need to get this type of program? Did you know that you don't need to come with 20% down? Did you know that you've had a job for 20, 30 years at the same place, so you're a guaranteed investment, right? Education is where we go next. Now, bandwidth, I worked at a CDFI, so I know what the information's out there, but it's bandwidth of these organizations to spread the message further, or it's, getting into the spaces and cases, and that goes into marketing, right? Getting in the spaces where people that you want to see this message will actually get this message. Because if people don't know they can do this, they won't do it. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, right? What else? I hope that was helpful. What else? Nothing. Lots of good comments though. This is really good. I'm glad you guys are engaged. I hope I see you next Thursday. What else? Okay, what about an equivalent of affirmative action for housing? Not just making the system equal, but giving advantage now where there has been disadvantage for so long. I think that's kind of where we are, right? There's the adage that if you want to put something in plain space, put it in a book, right? If you don't want people to see it, put it in a book. I think we are in a plain space right now where we need to, yes, Tim Anderson, Nixon played a big part in the divisiveness, but we're in a place right now about the affirmative action for housing. We're in a place now where people are putting out these programs, and what they're hoping is, well, they're not going to actually read it, so we'll never actually have to give that money. It's up to churches, CDCs, CDFIs, individuals, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, play cousins. It's up to each of us to now know we have to be educated and knowledgeable so that we can share that information with everyone we know, so that we can go get these mortgages they say they're going to give people like us. And then if they don't, then we need to push that envelope a little bit further and say, hey, this isn't happening. And then it's on paper that they have to keep doing this. If they're going to put these programs out and they're supposedly going to do it, we have to go and get into it, get into the weeds right now while they're still supposedly giving these things out, so that we have a chance to say, no, they're not doing it. They're still not doing it. And then there has to be rectification. We have an invitation for your next webinar. So yes, I will send it out in the email. That's probably the best way for me to do it, Patrick. Tim Anderson says that Nixon played a big part in the divisiveness and discrimination in housing. Absolutely. His argument that racial and economic discrimination was not synonymous. Absolutely. And no GI Bill access to Black veterans. So very true. So either there wasn't access, and at the point that there was the access for some sort of GI benefits, again, nobody told them you can go get this money. So they didn't go get that money. They didn't go use the opportunity. But there absolutely was a period of time where none of it was available, but somebody blew the whistle and said, hey, this is what's going on and what's not happening. So then they opened up just enough and nobody came and got it. And they could say, well, see, nobody came and got it. So we have to be diligent and educated on top of it. And if I know something, it's my duty to tell you. And if you know something, it's your duty to tell the next person. And so Nixon, yeah, FDR, Nixon, all the way down. Listen, it's still happening today. So while we're now in the middle of absolute forward-facing aggressive racism from the top, it's always been here. It's been latent and quiet, and it's just getting, it's getting worse and it's getting more egregious. So we're actually in a point where we're either going to go forward or go backwards. But I'll stay off of that soapbox because, my gosh, Lord knows I could get up there. I will email everyone the next couple of weeks, or it's really just a general link. It'll take you to the landing page that has every event on there. This was fun. Did y'all have a good time? Did you enjoy this? Did y'all learn something? Send me a chat note. Tell me that you learned something and it was exciting or eye-opening or something. Tell me. Yeah, high five, Chad Jones. Thanks, Chad Jones. What else? Anybody else? At this point, we're all friends. We're just chatting. What else? What do you think? Did we learn a lot today? Did you learn something new? Are you fired up? Oh, good, Patrick. I'm so glad this is something new. I'm glad it wasn't something you were familiar with and you learned something new. Nobody believes me, but I was a teacher once, so for a long time. Well, 9 years I was a teacher. And so this is kind of my jam. Well, I tell you what, if there are no more questions, no more thoughts, no more anything, thank you, Kelsey. We are going to end a little early. Ooh, I don't know about you, but when I was in school, I would like to end a little early. So I am so grateful for everyone that came out today. I will be grateful to see you next week. Thank you, Terry White. Glad you were here, buddy. I look forward to seeing you guys next week and every Thursday this month. And I think I'll have one thing that maybe two now. Things pop up in my brain, but in October, I think we'll do another one, another couple of things. But it'll be a little bit different. Well, I'm glad we got to chat today. I'm glad we got to hang out and see you. See you soon. Everybody good? Adios. Have a good week. Have a good weekend. Have a good holiday. All right. I am going to end us.